So, dear students, let us start the discussion on today's newspaper. The day is 12th October 2016. The first article is related to the bandwidth for growth. Now, if you see, the government has auctioned the spectrum, and in this process, it did not realize its revenue targets. What are the reasons? There is a high indebtedness problem for our telecom sector because of the higher spectrum prices. And the second thing is, now the spectrum demand is very high. And if the quality of the services to the people need to be improved, the government has to liberally allocate this particular spectrum. And the second thing, the bureaucracy is frightened of CAG and other accountability institutions to offer the spectrum and other natural resources for a lower price. Now, if you take our growth concerns into consideration, in India, we need to achieve the digital inclusion and it is necessary for the delivery of the public services. So lack of the quality services, cost of the spectrum, these are going to affect the quality and affordability of the services and which is not in a good spirit for the development of this country. So now we have to free up the bureaucratic fears and also reduce the cost of the spectrum and provide for an atmosphere which motivates the private sector to spread its wings from urban to the rural areas, especially with regard to data delivery. Now, coming to cross LOC surgical strikes. Now, Mr. Shivshankar Menon, he was our previous national security advisor. Now, what he said is there are various operations were undertaken across the LOC during UPA government too. There is Operation Ginger is a typical example for this, which has happened in 2011. Now, the goals of these are very much different from today, according to Mr. Menon. Now, what he says is, in those days, to calm down the Pakistani army and to make them known that, yes, India cannot tolerate these terror attacks. So, a message, overt message was sent to them. A covert message was sent to them. So it is not meant for the domestic audiences. It is purely meant for the Pakistani civilian establishment and the army. But today, the public publicizing of these attacks, it is only meant for the domestic audiences over here. And the second thing, the surgical strikes, the term itself is very wrong. The reason is, it is a Cold War era term where the governments in the other countries are being brought down by the military action. So that's a very wrong, misleading term to be used in this particular context. So the objective of today is to bring a silence on the actions of the other government, especially with regard to the terror activities or terrorists crossing the border. So we can better use covert operations as a term for this. So that's what is Mr. Menon says. So the objective of those days is to bring in the peace and to make the military of the Pakistan to understand that it is not in good alignment with India's interests. Now coming to the military fables of a democracy. Now here there are few things. The militarized society and a democratic society, the values are very much different. The questioning and critical thinking, these are part of the democratic society. So that is the reason why in the United States and UK, the countries are questioning about the military interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it is not mixed with the nationalistic fervor and the reasoning is not obscured with this sense of nationalism and militarism. So if you take the Chilcoot report in UK, it has squarely pointed out that UK's government was wrong in making an assumption that yes, there are ripe situations exist in UK, in Iraq for the military intervention. There is no proper proof to it. So it means the military interventions, they have higher human costs, resource expenditure, and also deviation of the goals of the government. So that is the reason why they need a critical scrutiny in the countries. So the democracy does that critical scrutiny. And the second thing is, whenever there is a military action, the developmental perspective is diluted and deviated. If you clearly observe in India, so whenever the governments have changed, or nationalistic fervor has been brought in after the Kargil war, after parliamentary attack, there is a huge amount of the money which has been diverted for these exercises. For Operation Parakram, we have spent around $1.2 billion as an expenditure. So, in this context, what we can say is the aggressive nationalism rooted in militarism is not going to do good for the country in the long run. So, the democratic values of critical thinking, questioning, and centered around the themes of accountability, human rights that need to be retained. Now, the next is let us see how the economy is really doing. Now, this talks about what is the purpose of statistical information. The first thing is the data collected has to be accurate, and the periodicity of the data has to collect relatively a larger span of the time so that we can make predictions. And the objective of the data is to create a cause effect relationship. It means that we need to come for some conclusions, and these derivations shall provide us a plan of action. So, in this context, are the statistical information released in India are giving these results or not? The first thing is the periodicity of the data is mostly monthly, and then it is very short span to calculate the trends of something happening, and quality of data is very poor, and it do not take into consideration all the aspects of the information necessary for decision making. And conclusions for action, if you come over here, let us take with regard to the manufacturing sector, there are two kinds of data released. One is index of industrial production and gross value addition in the manufacturing sector. The GVA is based on the labor and capital inputs into the manufacturing sector. What is the output? That is what is being calculated by IIP. There's a huge divergence of the information between these two. The reason is it takes 2004 2005 as a base year. The GVA has shifted to 2011-12 as the base year. And the second thing is IIP, it do not differentiate between the products. For example, if you are manufacturing an Alto car or an Audi car, for itself it's just a car, a unit of car production. But GVA will differentiate between the quality of the products. These are the reasons why there is a divergence increasing, and they are unable to really give us the trends. And the second thing is, when we get into the inflation, there is two indices, wholesale price index and consumer price index. Now there is a huge divergence between these two. Now wholesale price index has a different basket of products and consumer price index has a different basket of products. So under these circumstances, what is the conclusion this is trying to send it to the common man? What he can understand from this situation? So that's why our data analysis and statistical information organization has to be improved to provide for decisive actions. That is what is the essence of this article. Now, let us take into the Shiv Vishwanathan article. Now he says, we are not becoming sensible to the pains of others or to the suffering of the others, or we are not empathetic and compassionate with regard to the lives of the others. So, previously, India had a moral stand on the various issues. Now, it is more seeing the global affairs as transactional rather than seeing them as issues of the human suffering and issues related to the human rights and values. So, that is what is the essence he wants to drive us. Now, here, there is a war which is going on in Yemen. And this Yemen do not picture into our imagination because we see the countries based on their wealth, based on their utility. So the Saudi Arabia figures very much into the calculations of India because we have the expat community over there. We have our workers who are providing the economic output over there. And we see the remittances coming to India. But Yemen, a poor, oil deprived country, is nowhere in the calculations of the people. And then every perception is technicized now. So we are conducting our perceptions rather than in the context of a human response to certain index. So you say that there is hunger, suffering, and developmental deficit in Yemen. So then we immediately ask where it stands on the Human Development Index. So we have technicized that and reduced the suffering of the people in a particular country to a number. And then there is an obsession with political economy. So if you see the Yemen, we just simplify that as a conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran, a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, where Saudi is supported by the West. So this shows that the political economy or political aspects of a situation are dominating our perception. And coming to India's worldview, during the Nehru era, India has expressed its opinions liberally on various areas where suffering, oppression of the people is going on. Now, India appears to be lost its voice on these particular matters. And India, it is trying its relationships with the West, and it is more self centric in its relationships. So, from this perspective, what it says is what is the essence of this article, what the conclusion he brings is India as a community shall respond. Now, let's go to the next article. India unhappy over the Russia and the Pakistan ties. Now, if you observe from the very beginning, India has got close relations with Russia. If you see the Cold War era, Russia saw the Pakistan as a terror sponsoring state. Now, Russia changed its opinion and is also seeing the Pakistan as a victim of terrorism. It is very much against the narrative of India. In these circumstances, annual India-Russia summit is going to happen very soon. And in this annual India-Russia summit, India is going to press for international convention covenant on against terrorism, and in which it's going to talk about the cross-border terrorism and state-sponsored terrorism. And India wants to make the Pakistan or fix the Pakistan into this framework. So this obviously goes against the Russian interest because Russia is trying to expand its arms market and find the new markets for the same. So India is naturally is opposite to this. Coming to the China and Russia issue, there are two important challenges over here. One is the third missiles deployment in South Korea. So these missiles, the China sees as a long-term threat to them. And with regard to the freedom of navigation exercises conducted by the US in South China Sea, the China has an objections to this. So these are the articles for today. Thank you very much. All the best.